See you all again today. I was sharing with a couple people that I'm now doing I'm ahead of you all on Sunday morning, and then so I did chapter 8 on Sunday morning, and now we're doing chapter 6 here, and so I get a little confused. So if I start saying the wrong things, just correct me. But so we're in chapter 6 in learning to live without lying, and this is a great one. I was going to start off with this question. It's rhetorical, so don't answer it. But when was the last time you said a lie? How long ago was it? And of course, the funny thing was that these studies that were done said that in a 10-minute conversation, people lied 3 times. So it was like every 3 minutes you could tell a lie. And I think that we probably all know this. I mean, think about how we think that people live a certain kind of life, and then all of a sudden something happens and you find out that they had like this whole other life that no one knew about, and it's this big crisis kind of thing, and sort of just shocks us all. And so this whole idea of lying and deception is an important thing for us to think about. And again, it comes back to a matter of the heart. And why is it important to tell the truth? And one of the things we want to figure out is we want to figure out why we are prone as people, but also as a society, to lie. But we want to think also about what is the benefit of actually telling the truth. What does telling the truth do? And because sometimes we feel like the truth hurts, which we know it does, how do we tell the truth in ways that are helpful and building to each other, rather than just simply tearing each other down? And that's really what Smith is trying to get at in this chapter as he looks at it. So, but you have to think about this, and I identified with what he was saying. The whole thing about have you ever been with somebody you just sort of played along like you knew what they were talking about, and he opens up with that little illustration about the movie that he didn't see, and oh yeah, or the book was a book he didn't read or whatever. But have you ever done that? And the question is, why do we do that, or why are we prone to sort of say, yes, I know what you're talking about. Well, maybe we don't. And I think that there's an interesting piece in this for us to think about today in our society, and some of this is internet driven in my mind. Like, for example, we live in the information age. I mean, information is available to us at the touch of a key, and we can find out answers for anything. I mean, like today, when my girls ask me something, I say, hey, let's Google that, and they do the same thing. And so, there's this sense that we should know everything. The body of knowledge of literature and cultural stuff and everything else that we think we should know has grown, and we're embarrassed when we have to say, I don't really know much about that, because we don't want to appear sort of naive or uneducated, or we don't want to seem as if we're ignorant about things. So the pressure grows even more, and I think that's sort of a bad side of having so much knowledge available to us. I mean, somehow, if we could live into the reality that we cannot know everything and we don't need to know everything, that would be, would probably ease some of our stress in this. But we carry a good amount of stress thinking that we really ought to be well versed at everything. That is really a new phenomenon. I mean, in fact, it's even new today, because we know there's specialists. Like, we've had this whole idea of specialists. Specialists only know their field, but now all of a sudden it's like we're all supposed to know something about everything, and that's a problem. So here's some of the self-reflective questions. Have you ever said something like this? Oh yes, I read that book, when you really didn't. Or, oh yeah, I've seen that movie. Or, oh, I know what you're talking about, when you really don't. Or, here's another one. Yeah, oh yeah, let's do lunch sometime, right? That's another good one. Or, oh no, they can't talk right now. He or she's in a meeting, right? They're not home right now. No, that outfit doesn't make you look fat. He said that, not me. So, but there's those sort of setup questions, right? Like, how does this make me look? Great, it makes you look great. So this whole idea of lying is something that hits us sort of at the core. And even if you don't have a problem with lying, it's good to be conscious of that. He also, Jim Smith, talks about lying in relation to deception. And I think that's also where he gets into a whole nother layer of this that's good for us to think about. Because lying oftentimes is an attempt to try to control our situation. Like, we're worried that if we tell the truth, or if we say what we're really thinking or feeling, that it might affect either us or the other person in a bad way. So a lot of times when we lie, we're sort of controlling the situation. I can identify with this because one of my major mechanisms, like defense mechanisms as a child, was to lie about things. Now that might sound really bad, but given what my childhood was like, it actually was a way that sort of saved my life sometimes. I mean, like for example, I had a pretty explosively angry mother, and little things would set her over the edge. And I found out as a young child that if I just lied about what happened, that then it would be okay. So lying became a kind of self-defense, but you know very well that lying doesn't work in the long run, right? I mean, lying might get you out of trouble for the moment, but when you become an adult and you start lying, you're in trouble. And that happens with things like, oh, hey, Gary, I emailed you the other day and you haven't replied yet, and you want to say, oh, I was in the middle of writing you just as you were talking, and you have to say, no, yes, you're right, and I haven't replied yet, so I will. But, it's that temptation to sort of make it sound like you're much more engaged. Or, have you ever done this, like, I'm going to be praying for you, and then you see the person, and you're like, oh, I forgot to pray for them. So you know what I do? I go, God, be with them. And then I go, hi, how are you, But it's just that kind of stuff. And I think, but really what's wrong? I mean, we don't want to disappoint them or make them think we don't care. So we try to sort of defensively put something out there that'll protect us or protect them from thinking that. But what does honesty do for us? When I was working in Southern California, I worked at a place called Teledyne Camera Systems, and one day, and this is on the whole idea of deception and everything else, one day one of the employees went out to get in his car at the end of work, and his car was gone. So he just, sort of thinking, gosh, did my wife drop me off? I can't remember, I'm not sure what's going on, and he finally called the police to report that his car had been stolen. Well, the police found his car. It was sitting in his driveway. And so, he drove home with another employee, walked up to the car, and sure enough, his window on the driver's side had been smashed in. And on the dashboard was an envelope, and inside the envelope was $100 and 2 tickets to a Lakers game in Southern California. And he read the note, and it said, I'm so sorry to inconvenience you. I was on the way to the hospital with my wife who was in labor. Our car broke down, so I took your car to the hospital, and here's some money to pay for the window and 2 Lakers tickets, just as a thank you for letting us use your car. So he's like, wow, that's great. So he went to the Lakers game, right? He went to the Lakers game, and he came back, and he found out that somebody had pulled up in a U-Haul and emptied his house out that night. So the whole thing was this really elaborate setup to basically steal everything that he owned. I mean, they even took some of the carpets out of the rooms, and they knew they had this amount of time that he wouldn't be home. And it was just one of the saddest stories, but it also is sort of that description again about how deceptive sometimes things can be. So this whole idea of truth is really important. The other thing is that and this is something I realized as a child, it takes more work to lie than it does to tell the truth. When you elaborate a story, the thing about that is you've got to always remember that. You've got to remember what you told, what the lie was you told, because if you ever forget it, like I remember, and I told you this a little bit a while ago, I think too, that I went to a football game once. We didn't actually go to the game. We went over to the park. We messed around. My dad came and got me, and the first thing he asked me is, how was the football game, right? So right away, I'm like, oh, do I tell him what if I tell him I was in the park, I'll be in trouble. So I said, oh, it was great. Well, what happened? We lost, by 3 points. And I'm thinking, oh, I hope he doesn't look at the newspaper in the morning, or I'm just... But what was weird about that and other things like that is that then I had to remember that story, right? So it's actually a lot better just to tell the truth because you know what the truth is. You don't have to try to remember it. It just comes to you naturally. So lying's actually a lot of work, and it's not that great. There's 2 things that Smith identifies as reasons that we do lie. The first is he says that, it's a fear of what will happen if we tell the truth. And that's an important part of this. Like, what are we really afraid will happen if we tell the truth? And the other thing he says is that sometimes it's a desire for personal gain. And he lists this whole phenomena people lying on their resumes as the whole, trying to get gain, like trying to get into something you don't feel like you would get into. It's been interesting, the whole resume phenomena. Sometimes people will say they graduated from a certain university and they didn't even go there. I mean, it's just one of those things where, your lies will find their way out eventually. It's not like they never appear. Your sins will reveal themselves at some point. So Jesus' narrative obviously is different than this. Jesus' narrative is learning to speak the truth in ways that build each other up and that promote the truth as something that's important. And Matthew 5:33 is the passage that Smith holds up in this. He says, "Again you've heard that it was said to people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but keep the oaths that you have made in the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is God's footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair black or white. Simply let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Anything beyond that comes from the evil one.'" So what Jesus is really saying is, just be honest. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And don't make all these elaborate promises. And the elaborate promises sort of hint at the fact that you're really not going to do it. You're just sort of building this case for why would they ever expect that you're not going to do it. And so you'll get a chance to talk about this passage and think about it in terms of that Old Testament or that New Testament setting, but also where we're at with this as well. So how do we live into this idea of, beginning to tell the truth? And what becomes the cure then for lying? And there's several passages that Smith alludes to, and I wanted to just lift them up at the end of this segment of our study here. First one comes out of Ephesians. They all come out of the book of Ephesians. But the first thing that I think he makes a point that's very important for us to hear is that, those who follow God are learning to live into the truth of things. Jesus says, in John 8:32, he says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And I think that that's a piece of this, because again, like I said, when I lied, I had to remember it. There was a kind of bondage that comes in lying, where you've got to always remember. I mean, to this day, do I still have to remember what I said to my dad that day, 40 years ago about the football game? How much do I have to carry in order to perpetuate that falsehood that I've set up? But what does it mean then to really sort of walk in the truth? If the truth will set us free, then how do we figure that out? So Ephesians says this. Paul says in chapter 4, verse 14, he says, "Instead, speak the truth in love." He says, instead of being false about everything, speak the truth in love, and we will grow up into him who is the head, that is Christ. Now, the interesting thing that Paul's saying here that isn't right away observable is that Paul is saying that maturity only comes through speaking the truth to each other. When we don't speak the truth to each other, we don't grow up. So there's something about learning the truth and hearing the truth that enables us to actually grow up and to become responsible people. Now, if you think about your relationship with your children or other people that when people have elaborately tried to cover up the truth about a situation, it doesn't help anybody grow. In the extreme case of like the family that's dealing with alcoholism, but they're just not even going to face that. They're going to pretend like it's not there. They don't have the opportunity to grow because they're not facing that reality, as painful as it would be to do that. So part of telling the truth is that enables us to actually heal, grow, and move beyond the thing that we're struggling with. When we deny it, or when we act like it's not there, or we falsify it, then we don't have that opportunity. That's a really important point, and part of what Smith's trying to get at here. In chapter 4, then, verse 25, which comes a little bit later, he says, "Therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to their neighbor, for we are all members of one body. So there, Paul's talking about the fact that when we speak the truth, we become more unified. We remember that we are in this together, and we grow together that way also. There is a vulnerability in speaking the truth. But you know what's interesting about it is when people speak the truth about things, they often find that there are others that feel the same way they do, and that there are others who are struggling with the same things they're struggling with. So for example, in your small groups, a lot of times somebody's a little bit afraid to maybe say that they're having trouble about something or something's bugging them. Or maybe even they're afraid to say, I don't agree with the author on this certain point. But what's interesting is when you do that, you find out you're not the only one. And you find out then that there's others that understand what you're dealing with, and it sort of brings your whole group to a deeper level together, which is a positive thing as well. But it takes a little bit of a risk, to do that. Especially if it's something that you're struggling with, it takes some courage to be able to say, hey, this is what I struggle with. But I think what you'll find is you'll find others that want to support you in that as well. And then the last one is Ephesians 4:29. He says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, so that it might benefit those who listen. So the other thing that Paul's saying is that our words really make a difference. And when we use our words to build each other up, that's really living into this kingdom of God that Jesus is talking about. So many times in life we see people using words to tear each other apart, and that old saying, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me, is absolutely the wrong. I mean, that is the most false statement there is. Because you could shred somebody with your words. But people who work at building people up with their words are entering into that kingdom of God. So this whole idea, of loving, and he talks about that, putting off falsehood, building each other up. Love is always looking for the good of the other. And so as we grow up in Christ, as we mature, then we learn how to live into the reality of really telling the truth. That's part of why last week's soul training exercise was silence. Because what happens when you spend time in silence is you become more aware of your words. You become more aware of what you're saying, and you think about it more, and that's the value. You see, when you do these soul training practices, it helps you to think even more deeply about the things you do when you start doing them again. So this next week we get a chance to look at chapter 7, and we're going to look at this whole idea of learning to bless those who curse us. So this next week you get a chance to think about those people that aren't really your best friends, those people that always seem like they're the antagonist, those that are always on your back, those that don't like you. It might be a neighbor, it might be a family member. We had a neighbor at one point that, it's like whatever we did, she called the township because she just didn't like the fact that we were doing anything in our backyard. And township would always come up and they go, well, it is your yard after all, so I don't know what she's complaining about, and we go, yeah, but we've all got these kind of people, that are sort of after us, and but Jesus says, don't let that make you that kind of person either. When people curse you, bless them. When you have an enemy, pray for them. So we're going to look at that, and you'll get a chance to read that. But you're also going to get a chance, this is the real, I think, application of this next week, is you're going to get a chance to also pray for those who would usually be your competition or the competitors. And, so it's that whole idea of, again, praying for those, who may really sort of oppose you sometimes. Now, that seems like a hard thing to do, and I get it. I mean, it is hard, and I find it hard to do myself. But what's interesting is prayer always changes us more than it changes other people. And one of the things I found is that when I really pray for somebody that I'm not getting along with, all of a sudden I start to get a new appreciation for them. Like sometimes I think, oh, you know what, maybe they just had a really bad day. Or there's different things that all of a sudden I start to have more compassion for them. And so this is another way of allowing God to enter into these places where maybe we would sometimes block God out. And that's part of what Jesus is saying again, is kingdom living. is learning how do we invite God into not just the good things in our lives, but the tough places, where we feel like we need to defend ourselves. How can we rely on God's strength in those places as well? So God bless you as you go to the groups today and get a chance to think through about this whole idea. All right.